Welcome everybody, this is SharePoint Patterns and Practices Webcast, and this time we're not going to actually again deep dive on the code. We're going to talk about what would and what should every SharePoint admin know about SharePoint Framework. So kind of a considerations for organizations or administrators of the tenants related on SharePoint Framework solution. There has been a lot of obviously discussion in the internet around the different aspects of the SharePoint Framework, and we wanted to clarify some of these topics for everybody who's watching the webcast as well. My name is Sasu Juvonen. I'm a senior program manager from SharePoint Engineering, and with me today as my secondary speaker is Waldek Mastukarts. So Waldek, will you do the intros as well?
Hi everybody, my name is Waldek Mastukarts. I am Office Development MVP. I work at Rancor, and today we will talk about what should SharePoint admins know about SharePoint Framework.
Excellent. So let's immediately deep dive on the actual topic. So if you think about the SharePoint framework, and if you think about the considerations what the admins have, there's quite a few things what the administrator should be thinking whenever they are given an SPP KT package, or whenever they're considering starting using customizations in general in SharePoint. And this isn't actually that much different as it was before when you had a farm solution, or when you had a sandbox solution, or adding model customization. So the things are relatively the same, but you should be thinking obviously about the approval process. So how do you validate what is being given to you as a customization which is getting deployed? You should clarify the responsibilities. Who's responsible of what if something goes wrong, because it's IT. Evidently something goes wrong at some point. Who do we gonna call? And the answer is not Ghostbusters in this case.
I just wanted to say that.
But you need to absolutely clarify the responsibilities. You need to actually clarify the SLAs for the customizations as well. Related, and again, it really relates on the who's owning the customizations. If it's an in-house development, or if it's outsourced development, or if it was a random guy who did something and left, and nobody knows how to contact the person anymore. We should clarify the hosting locations, and let's talk about all of these things more detailed in a while as well. There's some security considerations related on customizations, and there's some specifics related on SharePoint Framework, and we can pinpoint those in upcoming slide as well. So in the comparison of the older way of doing these customizations, and obviously there's considerations related on deployment process. And again, this is relatively typical thing. I don't personally think the considerations have that significantly changed. So the key topics are exactly the same from the ages of farm solutions, where you needed to actually think through when do we deploy, who's responsible, what if something gets broken, what is the impact for the internal processes. One of the things what we especially wanted to kind of concentrate first is the security considerations. So if you think about the SharePoint Framework solutions, one of the kind of a key specific differences in the SharePoint Framework solutions is the fact that they are JavaScript. They are JavaScript which are running in the context of the browser. So essentially, they are running in the security context of the user. And this is slightly different than it was with adding model. Adding model was explicitly introduced to have additional security layer with an OAuth. So you would be always kind of again, depending on the setup slightly, but you basically would be always in the context of the user permissions plus the adding permissions. And the adding model absolutely supported in the future as well. So if the SharePoint Framework solution, if you have concerns around running script in the context of the user, you can always fall back on the adding model, where we have that security isolation in the future as well. One of the considerations which people might actually not think about is the script integrity in the context of hosting locations. As part of the customizations, people are delivering JavaScript, and those JavaScript files are not actually in the package, in the solution package. The solution package itself only contains a reference that, hey, JavaScript files are hosted in this particular location. And then the question is, okay, what is the location? Is it secure? What if somebody changes the JavaScript file without me knowing, which will then impact the process? Well, technically, you can absolutely use your SharePoint tenant as the hosting location as well, taking advantage, for example, the Office 365 CDN capability, and then publish those out using either the public or the private CDN option. And then the kind of a final topic here on this slide is the NoScript option, which is a additional consideration as well. So the NoScript was introduced already a few years ago, actually, on the Office 365. And that's really there to make sure that if tenant admin enables the NoScript on the sites, the end users of the site, let's say the site collection administrators or the site owners, they cannot embed random script on the site, which people tend to do in the old way. They kind of used to do that using script editor, Webparts, and user custom actions and JS-Link, which could be kind of a similar, let's say, in quotes, security concern as with SharePoint Framework solutions, because the JavaScript is running in the context of the user. So there's a option that the users' permissions are taking credit, so to say, by adding a script on the page which is doing something funky. The NoScript option, if you enable that, then the site and site collection administrators cannot just embed a script or a master page or a custom master page or a page layout or whatever on their site without the permissions of the tenant administrator using the SharePoint framework. A lot of me talking. Waldek, anything you want to add on this one?
This one, no, but I think that it would be good for us to have a look at the next slide where we talk about more about different approaches that you can use to build client-side customizations in SharePoint.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even though the title is kind of, again, referring to the development of these things, but we wanted to make this slide to kind of pinpoint the differences related on client-side customization options in the context, again, of a tenant administrator or as a tenant owner. So is it working with NoScript sites? Essentially, if you enable the NoScript option to block random scripts to be added on a site, what does it actually mean? Is there a permission model, which is a big thing, obviously? Is it using the OAuth permission model whenever the customization is added on the site? And then also, do you have a centralized approval? So can you, as a tenant administrator, approve or deny, or even afterwards go and essentially remove that customization from one centralized location? And let's start with actually SharePoint Framework. So we kind of quickly went through this one in the intro in the previous slides as well, but the SharePoint Framework solutions are deployed centrally as a tenant admin. So essentially, you go as a tenant administrator, you go to the app catalog, you are uploading the solution package to the app catalog, you give that solution package the permissions to be used across the tenant. And then the implications of doing so is that the JavaScript is then available across all of the sites within a tenant. But you're essentially making that centralized approval for that customization, which again would like to remind people, and that's why you should review what are you actually getting deployed. This is almost like the classic farm solutions in a classic 2010 or 2007 timeframe. You really needed to understand what the farm solutions actually contained and where it came from, so you're able to trust what the solution is doing. Because farm solution is equals full trust solutions, and it was actually running in the context of, well, administrative permissions. But looking into characteristics or looking into that mapping, so it works on a NoScript site. So SharePoint Framework solutions, they do work on even though NoScript is enabled on a site. So you can actually use these in the future in the modern SharePoint sites as well, like the modern collaboration sites or the modern publishing sites, which are coming at some point, again, depending on when you're watching the video. There is no permission model. So as long as you, as a tenant administrator, you approve that customization to be used within a tenant, then the site collection administrators can install the add-in, not an add-in, as a solution, SPFX solution. There we go, I'm mixing terminology. The site administrators can take that solution into a use by, well, the process is that they go and add an add-in, but they're actually adding a SharePoint Framework solution from a UI. And it has a centralized approval. You as a tenant administrator, you are approving that solution to be taken into a use in the app catalog when you upload that to be available within app catalog. Anything you want to pinpoint on this one, Waldek?
Well, actually, I have a few things that I wanted to ask you about. So, first of all, SPFX is all based on scripts, but yet it works on a NoScript side when you turn the NoScript option on. Why is that?
Well, the thinking is that there's a clear difference between the SharePoint Framework solutions and the script editor Webpart approach. The script editor Webpart, well, how would I put it? Let's rephrase that in the right way. The NoScript setting and configuration, the primary purpose for that one is to make sure that normal end users or site collection administrators cannot, without the tenant knowing, embed any customizations or script customizations on their site, so that you're unable to essentially add whatever random scripts on the site which are doing something which they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
The SharePoint solutions are considered safe as long as the tenant administrator is providing them to be available within a tenant by uploading them to be available in app catalog. They're considered safe, and therefore they will be fine to get hosted within the sites, even though there's no script is enabled.
Right. Okay. I see. So, and at some point you said that all of the modern side, or that you will be able to use that with the modern sites as well. Does that mean that all modern sites will be NoScript sites, or will that be a flag that we can flip on and off?
So the direction, at least where we're heading right now, is that all of the modern sites are by default NoScript sites, and this kind of relates on the thinking point from a customization perspective as well. Immediately, if we would allow user custom actions or JS links or whatever scripting implementations, people would continue implementing customizations which are dependent on a HTML DOM structure modifications, and those are not good. They're not future-proof. They're not future-proven approach. The SharePoint Framework is a future-proven approach, as long as, even though you would be doing, let's say, the compared solution, which will replace the JS link whenever we get that one out. Again, depending on the video, when the video is being watched. Did I answer your question or not?
Absolutely. So with that, how about we have a look at the next one in the row that we have?
Yes, absolutely. So the next one is adding model. So the addings have been around since 2013 release. They are isolated functionalities which are hosted either on an iframe or outside of the SharePoint as a provider-hosted adding, as an example. The iframe was exposed essentially using the client-side Webpart, which is then hosting or exposing information from a different domain, so there's a security level isolation there. Add-ins, they do work with NoScript sites, so you're able to essentially take add-ins into use in a NoScript site as well, because the customizations is isolated. They're not actually running in the context of the site, they're running outside of the site, even though from an end-user perspective it feels like they are exposed in the context of the site. There is a permission model, which means that essentially when you always take an adding into a use, you need to approve the permissions what the adding is requesting. It might be a tenant level permission, it might be a read level permission to a list, and slightly depending on a permission your adding could be in store or not. And that's probably one of the, let's say, massive differences between the SharePoint solution, like we can see from the map as well. In some sense, you might actually say that SharePoint framework solutions, they actually have an approval process as well. It's the one approval what the tenant administrator does when they deploy that solution in the app catalog. But they do not rely on the OAuth model, and that's why the permission model is marked not to be there with SharePoint framework solutions. And for adding models, we do have a centralized approval as well, even though technically there are ways ways, for example, with dev site collections to go around that one as well. But you do have a centralized approval of the add-ins. Anything you want to add there?
Yes, the one thing that I wanted to ask is, if I recall it correctly, in the past, we used to do things like we would deploy an add-in and we would use the add-in to register user custom action with the host web.
Yep.
Right? So the script would be, let's say, deployed with the add-in, but then would be registered with host web. So would that also work on a NoScript side or not?
Well, that would not work with the NoScript side. So you would be getting blocked of that script being added as a user custom action or as a JS link to the host web. And in some sense, that's actually a good scenario what you were defining. In some sense, you were using the add-in as that tool to get your JavaScript embedded on the site, which is essentially the same as kind of what SharePoint Framework is doing, but it more relates on, let's say, script editor Webpart. You were not really taking advantage of the permission model on runtime. You were using the permission model only on the deployment time to get access to get the permissions to add that JavaScript in. But if you have a NoScript settings enabled, that's not supported scenario, so you're unable to do that.
Right. And another thing that I wonder about, and correct me if I'm thinking the wrong way, but in the past when we build add-ins, we could say the add-in should have permission to read items or write items to manage web or all of that.
Yep.
With SPFX in that regard is also deployed to the catalog, right? So both add-ins and SPFX go together to catalog, but only add-ins have these permission flags, if you will.
Correct.
And given the fact that SPFX runs under the context of the current user, would you say that it's fair to agree that admins, when deploying SPFX packages, should treat them the same way as if they would deploy an add-in with tenant-wide access, or the maximum flags, if you will?
In some sense, yes, absolutely. So obviously there are some differences in I would say technical details around that statement as well. In the add-in model, you can create an add-in which is only using app-only permissions, so and requesting a tenant-level access, and then that add-in actually would have a tenant-level massive access. So it would have a massive permissions to do whatever in a tenant. In the SharePoint solution, you cannot do that. You would be essentially, in some sense, what the SharePoint solution approval in the app catalog is that you're saying, yes, I'm fine for this customization. I've reviewed the customization. I know what I'm deploying, and I'm fine for this customization to use the permissions of the user. There's no higher level elevation than the user permissions with those customizations. Yeah,
and with that, whatever the user can, the script will be able to do too, right? So
Absolutely.
Depending who is on the page, it could either be able only to read or to read and write and manage.
True.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay. And in some sense, it would be exactly the same as with, let's say, high tenant level permission provider-hosted add-in. If you give the provider-hosted add-in high permissions, and then the user goes to that provider-hosted add-in, it actually has all of the permissions as the user as well. So it really isn't a massive difference here, but there is let's say it's good to clarify and understand what is the permission difference. But you can actually you can do, let's say, high-level permissions in both models, but you cannot elevate in SharePoint Framework.
Right. Okay, cool. How about we have a look at the next one? Yeah.
Yes, let's have a look on the next one. So the next one, kind of a classic way of doing customizations in SharePoint Online, is the script editor Webpart, or content editor Webpart, if you prefer to use that as well. So the scripts are added on the pages by end users. As long as you have a page editing, let's say, permissions on a site, you can essentially embed a script on a site, and that can be considered. Some people are considering that as a security threat as well, because hey, who would know what the script is actually doing? Because the script can actually reference external scripts as well, and that was really one of the reasons why the NoScript option was introduced in SharePoint Online. So if a tenant administrator would like to disable a random end user to embed a script on a site somewhere in the tenant, because there might be hundreds of thousands of sites, who knows, they can actually do that from a centralized location. And that's how do you, if you enable the NoScript, then the script editor web part is not available. It doesn't matter if it's a modern site or a classic site, there's no support for then embedding scripts on a page. There's no permission model. There's no centralized approval. Essentially, these scripts are really, well, how would I put it? They are driven by the end user adding them on a page. Nobody else is aware necessarily on the scripts which are running on the page. And that could be considered as a, well, not an optimal situation.
So I guess that a concern here is not always that, not per se that the scripts that are added to the page are malicious, but one of the challenges that I can imagine is that when you load script from external URL that you do not control yourself, you cannot really guarantee the integrity of it, right? Because you don't own the location, and with that, the whole IT might not even know that there is somewhere a page within the whole intranet that does that.
True.
Right. So
absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that might be. Yeah. Yeah. Go.
Yeah. And again, if you think about that, that can be, let's say, well, that can cause issues in the future, no doubt. With adding model, adding model and SharePoint Framework solutions as a tenant administrator or a person who's taking this into account or installing them on a site. With adding model, yes, you have the permission model. If the adding is asking high-level permissions, this kind of falls in the same category as SharePoint Framework solution. But you will know from where those customizations are being loaded and the scripts are being loaded. It's not a random location somewhere unless you allow that. And again, that's a consideration on the review. And like we covered on the previous slide, you can absolutely host your, let's say, SharePoint solution framework, SharePoint framework solutions, and the JavaScripts also within your tenant. So you are the only persons who are able to control how those scripts are getting modified.
And I can imagine that there are folks who would argue that, well, yeah, but a review is a difficult thing, and you might not always be able to do it. But I guess the point is that with SPFX and add-ins, you have the chance to review them because everything goes through a central approval, whereas with the scripts that are embedded directly on the page, that is being done beyond the IT, so they might not even know that there is somewhere a page on a script on their intranet that embeds script, right?
True, absolutely, and that's quite common the case. Whenever then we're running whatever scanning tools across the tenants, I've done that when I was a field consultant. We built those tenant scanning tools for customers because they needed to know on where there was a script being embedded, and then because they had no clue. With SharePoint Framework solutions or add-ins, you actually have that centralized view. SharePoint solutions even more, because SharePoint Framework solutions, they can only be deployed across the tenant by using the app catalog as a tenant administrator. There is no doubt the most control over there.
Right.
And then the kind of a final option here, just to pinpoint that, it's nothing more than kind of a variation of the script editor Webpart, or we kind of touched this one already on the Wildex point as well. What if I would use an adding to associate a script to a user custom action or a JS link in a field? The story with that one is exactly the same as with script editor Webpart. Essentially, it won't work with the NoScript sites. You're unable to do that. There's no permission model. The script is being executed by, in the context of the end user, and that's it. And then there's no centralized approval. As long as the person has access to associate the script, the JS link, or to the user custom actions on the site, you have no clue which of the sites have these scripts associated. So the challenge is exactly the same as with script editor Webpart.
Cool.
But again, considering those options, I would say if there are concerns around these scripts being added on a page, the NoScript is no doubt an option. Enable the NoScript, essentially disable the support for scripting within the sites on these random scripts being added on a site, and then use SharePoint Framework or adding model to introduce the native customizations in a controlled way. In some companies that might be fine, in some companies people might say that no, it's restricting too much. But that's why you have that control. You as a tenant administrator, you can actually control the NoScript from tenant admin UI. Is it enabled or not, and how is it controlled? And you can go down to the level of site collections. In certain site collection, it can be allowed. In certain site collections, or by default, it might be not allowed. And that's probably the best way of thinking this through. There's always some exceptions on the role.
And another thing that I wanted to ask, right? So imagine that you would have a high business impact site that you would want to protect from random scripts being embedded to, and you would set on that site the NoScript flag to on, right?
Yeah.
What if somewhere else you would have another site that is unprotected by a NoScript flag? And on that script you would have, or on that site you would have a script. Would that script be able to reach out to that other site, the secure site, or not?
Well, the script itself can access a REST endpoint and REST API endpoints on the other side, as long as the user has the permissions to hit those endpoints. But again, it depends on what kind of access that script would be looking into. That's really, again, depends on the technical details.
Right. Okay.
Cool, but I think that's it for this one. We didn't want to intentionally record a demo around this one. Rather go through the options and concentrate more on the practical scenarios and what does it actually mean. But I think we went through all of the scenarios. I think we explained that, let's say, the differences from a security perspective between the options. Anything you want to add on this one, Walde?
Well, yeah, so we talked about a few things, but if there is anything else, don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we will try to explain any concerns that you might have regarding SPFX or any other model available to date.
Good point, Waldek. Please do open up the communication channels. Please let us know if there's anything what we need to tell more. But thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll come up with a new webcast sooner or later. Thank you.
Bye.